If you're hearing these words today, it's not by accident. Before you go further, take a moment. Like this video if something is already opening up inside you. Subscribe, because this message is only the first of a series of truths your soul has been waiting for. Share it with someone who, like you, sincerely seeks God but senses something essential is still missing. And if you receive this message with faith, if a phrase strikes your heart while you listen, write 111 in the comments. Not for me. For you. To mark the exact moment the truth started setting you free. Listen closely. There's a secret most Christians only discover very late in life, sometimes after decades of service, sacrifice, and repeated prayers, sometimes even after having given everything for God without ever really feeling at peace with Him. This secret isn't hidden in some complicated teaching. It isn't reserved for a spiritual elite. It's simple, so simple that many walk right past it, because they're searching for something bigger, more impressive, more mystical. If you're listening to these words right now, understand this: you didn't land here by accident. Something in your heart has been searching for a long time, and this message might just be the answer you've been waiting for without even knowing how to put it into words. Most people never learn this truth, but the Christian life was never designed as an accumulation of religious performance. It was never a contest of merit, a competition of service, a ladder to climb through ever greater sacrifices. And yet, how many believers spend their entire existence chasing after God through what they do for Him, without ever stopping to simply be with Him? They pray to obtain. They serve to earn. They work to prove. And one day, often late, sometimes even at the end of their life, they realize with a deep sadness that they spent years building for God without ever really having sat with Him. Understand this. The secret Christians understand too late is that God isn't first looking for your service. He's looking for your presence. He doesn't just want what you do for Him. He wants you. Your heart, your attention, your real presence, not just the visible fruits of your religion. It's not a coincidence that so many believers, after years of intense devotion, still feel a deep emptiness, a spiritual exhaustion, a strange distance from the very one they've served for so long. That emptiness isn't a sign they served badly. It's a signal that something more important got lost along the way. Think of Moses. This man led an entire nation out of Egypt, witnessed extraordinary miracles, received the law directly from God's own hands, accomplished works no man before him ever had. And yet, at a specific moment in his life, he didn't ask God for more power, more miracles, more success for his mission. He asked for one thing only. He asked to see God's glory itself. After everything he had already lived through, after every victory already won, what he wanted most deeply wasn't to accomplish more, it was to know more deeply the one for whom he was accomplishing it all. If this resonates with you, if you too have served God for a long time without ever truly seeking His presence for its own sake, then listen closely. Moses shows you the path too many believers only discover at the end. God is revealing something to you right now, in this very moment. He doesn't just want to be the subject of your requests. He wants to be the place where you dwell. Understand the difference, because it changes absolutely everything. Praying to get something from God and praying to be with God are not the same prayers. Serving God to accomplish a mission and serving God because you simply can't live apart from Him are not the same motivations. Most Christians live their faith oriented toward action, toward achievement, toward visible results. But God's heart, from the very beginning, has never changed. He's looking for a relationship, not a performance. Think of David. A powerful king, an accomplished warrior, a man who defeated entire armies, who built a kingdom, who achieved feats few men in history ever have. And yet, when you read his deepest words, they're never words of pride over his accomplishments. They're words of thirst for God's presence. He expresses his burning desire to simply dwell in the house of the Lord, to gaze upon His beauty, not to obtain something from Him, but simply to be near Him. David, despite everything he had achieved, knew that the greatest wealth of his life wasn't his throne, nor his victories, nor his fame. It was closeness to God Himself. Understand this. If a man as accomplished as David placed God's presence above everything he had built, maybe what you're chasing today isn't what truly matters most. Listen closely now, because this is at the heart of the secret. Many believers confuse knowing God with knowing about God. They know things about Him. They know verses, principles, teachings, doctrines. But knowing information about someone has never been the same as truly, personally, intimately knowing them. You can read hundreds of books about a friend without ever having spoken to them once. You can know their entire biography without knowing their heart. That's exactly what happens to so many sincere believers, who have accumulated an impressive knowledge of the Bible, of service, of theology, without ever having developed a real, living, daily relationship with the one they've been studying for so long. Think of Job. A man who had known God his whole life, who lived by his commands, who honored him in everything he did. And yet, after going through the most intense suffering of his life, after losing almost everything he owned, after enduring the unjust accusations of his own friends, he arrives at a stunning conclusion. He tells God that until then, he had only heard of him by word of mouth, but now, through this trial, his own eye had truly seen him. Understand the depth of that statement. A man who had served God for years realizes, at the peak of his suffering, that he had only known him superficially, indirectly before, and that it's only through the deepest trial that he came to a real, experienced, intimate knowledge. Most people never learn this truth, but sometimes it's precisely life's most painful moments that finally reveal the true face of God, the one religious routine had never managed to show. It's not a coincidence that so many people truly discover God only after losing everything. It's not a coincidence that God's presence suddenly becomes real, tangible, almost touchable, precisely in the moments when nothing else is left to hold on to. The secret many Christians understand too late is that God had always been closer than they thought, but that the distractions of life, the achievements, the responsibilities, even the religious activities themselves, had ended up creating an invisible distance between them and Him. Think of Elijah, a prophet who had just experienced an immense, public, overwhelming spiritual victory. And yet, right after that victory, he collapses, exhausted, alone, on the edge of despair, under a tree in the wilderness. And what's fascinating is the way God reveals himself to him in that moment of total weakness. Not in the violent wind that tears through the mountains. Not in the earthquake. Not in the fire. But in a still, small whisper. Understand this. Elijah had already witnessed spectacular miracles, fire falling from the sky, prayers answered in dramatic fashion. And yet, it was in the quietest silence that he met God in the most intimate way of his entire life. Many believers look for God in the spectacular, in the visible miracle, in the extraordinary display. But the secret too many people understand too late is that God most often reveals himself in silence, in quiet intimacy, far from the noise and the performance. Listen closely, because I want to talk to you now about something very concrete. How many believers today fill their schedules with religious activities, meetings, services, commitments, while completely neglecting the simple, silent moments spent alone with God? They're busy for God, but rarely present with God. And that seemingly subtle difference changes absolutely everything about the depth of a spiritual life. You can be extremely active in a faith community and yet completely empty on the inside, because activity has replaced relationship. It's not a coincidence that Jesus himself, despite all the crowds demanding his attention, despite the sick needing healing, despite the teaching that needed to be given, regularly took time to withdraw alone, to quiet places, to simply be with his Father. If the one who carried the most important mission in all of human history took time to stop and be in God's presence, why would we think our own constant busyness is necessary, let alone spiritual? Understand this now. This secret isn't only about personal prayer. It touches the whole way we live out our faith day to day. Think of Daniel, a man who held a position of great responsibility in a foreign kingdom, with a schedule that was certainly full, important decisions to make, constant pressure around him. And yet, despite all of that, he kept a fixed habit, 3 times a day, of withdrawing to pray, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the danger it posed to his own life. This wasn't a prayer of convenience, only prayed in moments of crisis. It was a constant habit, deeply rooted in his daily life, long before the crisis ever came. And it was precisely that habit of regular intimacy that sustained him when the furnace of danger arrived, the lion's den, the pressure of power. Daniel didn't develop his relationship with God in the moment of crisis. That relationship was already built, day after day, in secret, long before the whole world ever watched him stand firm under trial. If this resonates with you, understand that the secret isn't to build intimacy with God only when the storm hits. It's to build it every day in the calm, in the ordinary, in the silence, so it's already solid on the day the storm actually comes. Most people never learn this truth until it's too late, until the crisis arrives and they discover, with immense pain, that they never built that relationship beforehand. Don't make that mistake. Don't put off until tomorrow the presence God desires today. Think also of Esther, a woman placed in a position of immense influence, for a precise moment in history. And before even acting, Before even making the most courageous decision of her life, she chose to stop, to fast, to seek God deeply before appearing before the king. She didn't rush headlong into action. She positioned herself first in God's presence, in dependence on Him, before she moved. How many believers today act first, run first, exhaust themselves first, and seek God only as a last resort, when they have no other option left? The secret Esther had already understood is that God's presence must come before the action, not simply accompany it or follow it. Listen closely, because I want to talk to you now about something many only discover at the end of their life, often with deep regrets. It isn't the quantity of things accomplished for God that brings peace when looking back. It isn't the number of services rendered, the number of projects completed, the number of titles earned in a faith community. What brings peace, what truly fills a life, is the depth of the relationship lived day after day, in secret, away from every eye, in the moments when no one was watching, when no one was applauding, when it was just you and God in real intimacy. Many believers spend their entire lives building an impressive spiritual reputation in the eyes of others, while neglecting the one thing that will truly matter in the end, the quality of their personal relationship with the one they claim to serve. Think of Gideon. Before he ever became a powerful deliverer for his people, he first had a personal, intimate, almost intimidating encounter with God's presence. That encounter came before any action. It was only after being personally touched by that presence that he was able to accomplish what God had planned for him. Understand this: order matters enormously. Presence always comes before mission, not the other way around. Too many believers try to accomplish a great mission hoping it will later bring them closer to God. But the real path works the other way. It's closeness with God that gives birth to an authentic mission, carried by His strength and not by human exhaustion. And now look at Jesus Himself, the ultimate example of this secret. Despite a mission of unimaginable scope, despite massive crowds constantly demanding His attention, despite responsibilities no other human being has ever carried, He never let activity smother His relationship with His Father. He regularly withdrew alone, often early in the morning, to solitary places, to pray, to be in the presence of the one who sent Him. If the busiest, most in-demand, most important person in all of history made this time an absolute priority, then our modern excuses about lack of time, about the busyness of life, about the impossibility of stopping, no longer hold up. It isn't a question of available time. It's a question of real priority. Understand this now: this secret isn't an invitation to abandon service, to stop acting, to become passive in your faith. It's not that at all. It's an invitation to reverse the order of priorities. Serve from presence, rather than seek presence through service. Act from a heart already full, rather than act hoping to one day be filled. The difference between these two approaches is immense, even if from the outside, the actions can sometimes look the same. A believer who serves out of exhaustion, obligation, or guilt will sooner or later collapse, feeling an immense emptiness despite everything accomplished. But a believer who serves from an intimacy already lived, already nourished, will find in their service a source of life rather than a source of exhaustion. If you recognize this emptiness in yourself, if you feel that despite all your years of service, prayer, and religious commitment, something essential is still missing, understand that you're not alone. It's not a coincidence that this message reached you today. Maybe that emptiness isn't a problem to be solved with more activity. Maybe it's an invitation to slow down, to stop, to return to the simplicity of a real, daily, silent relationship with the one who loved you long before you ever did anything for Him. Understand this too: this secret changes completely how you walk through life's trials. A believer who built their faith only on achievement finds themselves helpless in the face of suffering, because suffering no longer lets them produce, perform, or prove anything. But a believer who has learned to simply be with God, regardless of what they can or can't accomplish, walks through the storm differently, because their security doesn't rest on their results, but on a relationship that stays intact no matter the circumstances. That's exactly what Job discovered in the middle of his deepest suffering. He could no longer accomplish anything, prove anything, offer anything. All he had left was the bare presence of God, without the works, without the service, without the reputation. And it was precisely in that total stripping away that he had the most authentic experience of his life with the one he had always served. Listen closely to this too, because I want to stress a point too often overlooked. This secret isn't discovered in theory. It's discovered through the repeated practice of silence, of waiting, of undistracted presence. You can't simply understand intellectually that God's presence comes before service, and then keep living exactly as you did before. This secret demands a concrete change in how you live each day. It sometimes means turning down an extra religious activity to preserve a moment of silence. It sometimes means saying no to something that looks good on the surface, in order to say yes to simple presence. Many believers are afraid of choices like that, because they fear looking less committed, less productive, less devoted in the eyes of others. But understand this: true devotion is never measured by the quantity of activities accomplished. It's measured by the depth of the heart that carries them out. Think again of David's life, especially in the darkest moments of his journey, when he was fleeing through the wilderness, far from any comfort, far from any public recognition. It was precisely in those moments stripped of all visible activity, of all organized service, that he wrote some of the most intimate and profound words ever addressed to God. It wasn't in the palace, surrounded by his advisors, busy with the affairs of the kingdom, that he produced his most intimate writings. It was in the silence of the wilderness, stripped of everything, that he developed a relationship so genuine it still touches hearts thousands of years later. That should challenge us deeply. Maybe the moments when we feel the most spiritually unproductive, the moments when we have nothing impressive to show, are exactly the moments when the most precious relationship is being formed. Understand also that this secret transforms how you view the waiting seasons of life. Many believers experience waiting as a waste of time, a period to endure before real spiritual life resumes, before active service picks back up, before the mission restarts. But if God's presence is what matters most, then waiting itself becomes a precious opportunity, perhaps the most precious of all, to cultivate that intimacy without the distraction of constant activity. It's not a coincidence that so many great biblical figures had their deepest revelations precisely during periods of waiting, solitude, and apparent inactivity. The time you might see today as wasted, as unproductive, as a frustrating pause in your spiritual life, could very well be exactly the moment God chose to draw you closer to Him in a way busyness never would have allowed. Listen closely to this, because it might be the most freeing truth in this entire message. God doesn't love you more when you accomplish a lot for Him. He doesn't love you less when you seem less spiritually productive. His love has never depended on your religious performance. Understand this deeply, because it's precisely this false belief, this idea that God's love must be earned through achievement, that drives so many believers to wear themselves out their whole lives without ever finding the rest they're searching for. You don't need to prove your worth to God. You don't need to earn His presence. It's already offered to you freely right now, in this very moment as you listen to these words. Many discover this truth too late, often after total exhaustion, after a collapse, after a season of spiritual burnout where they finally realize all their religious busyness never managed to fill the emptiness they carried inside. Don't let that happen to you. Understand today that resting in God's presence isn't a waste of time, a spiritual laziness, a neglect of the mission. It is, on the contrary, the very foundation on which every authentic mission must be built. If this resonates with you, make a decision right now, in this very moment. Decide to slow down, even for just a moment each day, to simply be present before God, with no agenda, no list of requests, no performance to pull off. Just being there. Like a child simply sitting beside their father, with no need to justify their presence through some particular action. This is the simplicity most Christians only rediscover at the end of their journey, often with a sadness mixed with relief, realizing that the most precious thing had been available from the very beginning, freely, unconditionally, with nothing to earn. Understand too that this secret never works against real action, it becomes its source instead. Once God's presence becomes the first priority again, service doesn't disappear, it transforms. It stops being an attempt to get something from God and becomes a natural overflow of what has already been received in intimacy with Him. A believer deeply rooted in that presence will still serve, still love, still give, but without the anxiety of having to prove anything. It's not a coincidence that you feel, right now in this very moment, a deep longing to stop, to breathe, to simply be in the presence of the one who created you. That longing isn't random. It's God Himself drawing you toward Him, gently, patiently, just as He always has, long before you ever started chasing after Him through religious activity. He never needed you to chase Him. He was simply waiting for you to stop long enough to see Him already there, right beside you. Understand this, finally, this secret so many believers discover too late isn't reserved for a select few. It's offered to you today, right now, in this very moment of listening. You don't need to wait years more in service, or a major crisis, or a total collapse to understand this truth. You can receive it now in this exact moment, simply by choosing to believe that God's presence matters more than everything you do for Him, and that this presence is already within your reach. If this message touched something deep inside you, if you feel these words spoke exactly to what your soul had been searching for, take a moment now. Like this video so it can reach other weary believers who, like you, have run for so long without ever finding rest. Subscribe to keep receiving messages that feed a faith rooted not in performance but in relationship. Share it with someone who needs to hear that God isn't asking for more effort, but for more presence. And if you receive this truth with faith, if something inside you just broke free while listening to these words, write 111 in the comments, as a quiet sign that you're choosing, starting today, to stop waiting to live out the intimacy your heart has been searching for all along. You didn't land here by accident. The secret so many people understand too late, you just understood in time. Never let it slip away again.